So welcome everybody to this week's eLearning Network webinar. I'm delighted to introduce Matt Ash, who is Director of Learning and Performance at MediaZoo, who's going to be talking us through challenges, etc., facing learning and development, I guess during lockdown, but also more generally too. So without further ado, I'm going to switch off my video and hand it over to you, Matt, but I'll keep an eye on the chat. Just say to people, put your questions in the chat where everybody can see them. And also make sure you've chosen the drop-down panelists and attendees so that everybody can see everybody's comments. Okay, well, over to you, Matt.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joan. And thank you very much for having me. It's good to chat to you all this morning. I'm just going to share my screen and just want to start off chatting this morning. We can go through a few slides and then dive into your kind of questions really, and hopefully got a few options to bring through. Sorry, just trying to find my screen there. So any point today, feel free to ask questions, and I think we can stop and take those as we go on. But I really would like this to be a collaborative session. So your thoughts, ideas, and solutions will be a huge part of, I think, how we can get around some of these. Been some great questions, so hopefully will be quite an insightful session. So I guess just a very brief introduction to me if you haven't heard of me or come across me or met me before, but I run the learning team at MediaZoo, and we're a high quality bespoke learning provider, probably best known for film and digital, but we also work with companies on strategy and experiences and events, I guess all used to do events. So that's a slightly different world now. But obviously feel free to get in touch with me. You can find me on LinkedIn. And I'm always around to have a chat. So let's jump in. So all I need to do is work out how I can change slides. There we go. So the first one I want to start with is talking about complex problems. And part of this is looking at, what the cities, what do pandemics, and what do learning all have in common? And the fact is that they're all complex problems. And those are things that are really, really hard to solve. And actually wicked problems, like the title of the slide, are almost unsolvable. They're that complex. And some could argue that learning and pandemics and cities are examples of wicked problems because there are things you can do to improve and change them. But ultimately, sometimes there is no overall solution. There's an important distinction probably worth saying actually between what a complex problem is and a complicated problem. A complicated problem would be something like a jet engine that has a lot of moving parts and it requires deep knowledge to resolve. But it's a bit like an engineering problem. It has a definitive result. Does the plane fly? Does the engine move? Things like that. With complex problems, they're kind of different because they've got independent moving parts and they're less predictable. And all of those parts influence each other. And so the ultimate thing is there's few hard and fast rules when it comes to solving complex problems. And that's like with the same with people. And that's why I think, it's so critical to think about this in learning, is that humans, we ourselves are complex systems. So our brains and our bodies and all those parts, it's endless connecting bits that come together to form something greater. And then if you scale that out from ourselves to groups of people and all of our independent parts with our complexities, then creating a complex group. And so you can sort of start to see how these things become so difficult to manage. And that's what you're in the middle of, a bit like a city, forests, viruses, they're all complex problems with kind of multitude of connected parts. And your business is just like that. Your problems, your L&D, when you're trying to create content and you've got stakeholders, you've got subject matter experts, you've got your audience, and you've got your boss, trying to balance all of those is a really, really difficult thing to do. And a quick way to show that is thinking about systems. And in systems, you've got your elements, which would be, for a business, would be you and me and your colleagues, and a connector. And those are the terms that they use in systems thinking, if you want to get a bit geeky. But you've probably seen a map like this before. When we all come together, so this is all the people in your company, we're interacting in a really complex web. And the part that makes it so tricky is that all of these connectors have information coming in and out of them. And these are things that can drastically change behavior. So if you think about, you know, in the morning, you could have eaten, you could have gone for a run, you'd be not feeling well, you could be wake up feeling pretty good or pretty bad. You're going to have a huge workload, and that's affecting your energy, it's affecting your mindset, and it's affecting how you approach your job. And then how you connect with other people, with your behaviors and with your attitudes, can affect them, and vice versa. And so you can start to see how this web becomes really complex and really tricky to entangle, and why in things like psychology it's so difficult to, you know, to have definitive rules. A bit like, you know, in physics we have these very, very clear rules of motion and energy, but in psychology it's much, much harder, and almost part of what we need to do is a best fit solution. And so also looking at kind of maps like this, you can really start to see how marketing works and is so successful, because you can see, you kind of also viruses, actually you infect one person and then it spreads, and these systems can get super, super complex. Organic living, breathing systems are really, really complicated, but personally I think really interesting and really fun to challenge, and to also think about how to resolve them. And one of my favorite ways to thinking about resolving complex problems, getting to a point, is from Tim Brown, the CEO of IDEO, who, you know, the original design thinking pioneers. He's a really smart guy, and he has a really, really interesting way of looking at these kind of things. And his view is about changing perspective. And that's exactly why I just showed you that map, because when we approach, or when I approach complex problems, it's really important to me to focus in to the cause, but also to strip right back out and look at the process, the teams, the systems, the culture of the business as well. So zooming in and zooming out again to really kind of make a map, a visual map of how it all works, to really help focus on what we're trying to do. So the answer is yes, you can change the perspective, but how do we do it? And that's where I think we should jump into some of your questions and have a look and see what you asked, and start to kind of crowdsource some ideas and solutions, really. So the question that we asked, so I'm trying to use the wrong button to move slides again, is, you know, what's your biggest challenge in designing learning? So apologies if I didn't capture your answer in some of these that we show up, but there were quite a few, and really, really useful. So I started to group them together. So the first ones that really came up, really interesting, was, and thank you so much for your honesty in sharing these thoughts. Someone shared that, you know, just starting can be tricky, and sometimes it feels overwhelming. And then another response was keeping it fresh. So just stopping here and pausing for a second, has anybody got any thoughts about, you know, when you start a project, where do you begin? What do you do? And how do you keep, you know, how do you get new ideas and keep things flowing? Because I think it'd be a great point to get some views and ideas from others. And I'm just opening up the chat panel now while I work this out. You have to excuse me, because I'm work for a tech company, but not tech, even though I used to design tech products for a long, long time. So I've just got the chat panel open now. But yeah, drop in if you've got any ideas about this. What do you do when you start a project? And what do you do when you need a new idea, but you don't know where to turn? Oh, and sorry, yeah, if you can hear my puppy as well, I apologize for that. I've locked her in a room, because otherwise she'll shout at me while we're sat here talking, and it's quite distracting. Someone says, do you think coronavirus counts as a project? I think it does, absolutely. I think we can pick that up in a bit. So Ben Gallagher goes swimming. And that's exactly what I would suggest is something like that. Get away from your desk, go and do something different. And from Jack, starting is getting past your own perspective. So getting closer to people's real issues. And the problem is where I'm trying to get us to start more often. And that is the heart of one of the hardest things to do in L&D. And that's quite pertinent to some things coming up later on, Jack. So I think your insight into that will be really, really fascinating in a minute. Focus on the end objective, to try and keep focused towards the right solutions. That's always great, isn't it? When you're there wondering where to start, actually go, well, what are we trying to achieve? Where do we want to be? What's the world going to look like when this is working? And I love those future kind of conversations, for good and bad, because you can sit there and dream, okay, well, you know, we've launched it. It's amazing. What are people doing? What are they saying? How are they feeling? that really helps kind of start to vision it backwards. And at that stage as well, I always like to vision it badly as well. So imagine if it's launched and it's gone completely wrong. What went wrong? How did it go wrong? And you can really start to detail all of these things that you might forget to check and pay attention to during the process. So really, really valuable approach to start to dream the end of the project before you start. And from Peter Mitchell, it starts with conversations. Often what's asked for and what's needed can be different, of course. Again, I think we're going to get to that one in a minute. So that's a really key one. So Peter, it'd be great to hear your views then. From Joan, speaking to stakeholders and ask what the ideal world looks like. And then what's happening now, which leads to what to do to bridge the gap. And that's the huge one, isn't it? It's where you are versus where you want to be. And then it's what do we need to unlock to get in there? And that's where the magic happens. And that's my favorite bit of kind of consulting and projects. Oh, so he's just getting, Jack's sharing that to everyone. Asking open questions. Perfect. You know, that's one of my favorite things to do in a project, partly because I'm a bit annoying, but asking why loads and loads of times, getting to that root cause piece. Keeping it fresh from Thomas Dixon is staying involved with the wider industry and see what people are doing and what they're innovating. Part of this is continuous professional development, absolutely. Where do you guys keep fresh? Where do you get your ideas from? eLearning's a great place. Networking is so important. I think all of my great ideas come from my close kind of friends and who I follow on LinkedIn. But if anyone's got any great examples and places where you get ideas from, please share them because I want to steal them as well. And obviously 5 Whys from Catherine. Gosh, I hope that's okay, me reading all these out. I feel a bit like I'm talking to myself. But there's some really, really useful stuff here, and hopefully we can get this captured and actually share it afterwards along with the questions. I briefly want to...
Sorry, Matt, it's Joan here. It's absolutely fine to pick up on the chat. I think it makes, allows people to engage.
Brilliant.
Lets you interact, so no problem there.
Yeah, and just share any feedback if you want me to move on or keep fast. Just please let me know. I'll get steered by this chat panel. So I wanted to talk about idea generation because I think this is really important. Is when you're coming to a new project and you are looking at a blank sheet of paper, it can be so scary. I've been there before. So just wanted to touch on a brief bit of idea generation from a book that I read a long time ago called, I think it's A Technique for Producing Ideas by James Webb Young. And he was an ad man from the 50s, and he kind of wrote the model of what advertising and marketing should be, and it's still very similar today. And his view is that an idea is a connection between different objects, and a new idea is a new combination, so just something that hasn't been done before. So the iPhone is one of my favorite ones. It's a phone, it's a camera, and it's a music player, and they combined. It's that simple on the top level, and then you obviously have to work out how to get it to operate. So some things that we do is random object comparing, as a creative exercise. So we've actually got a bag of toys that we play with sometimes, so you just pull 2 things out like a car and a finger puppet, and then you've got to come up with an idea that joins them together that becomes something to do. It can be fun to do idea generation. So it was the official reveal of the iPhone. I've never seen that, but I guess it makes sense that Steve Jobs would explain it that simply because he's pretty good at that. It's all about taking ideas from what's around you in the world, and the method that James Webb Young promoted was very similar, and it's been mentioned already today. His first view is that you need to spend time in the world paying attention to what's around you. When you see adverts that are great, articles, things that catch your eye, take a note of them, write it down, take a picture, record it on your phone, whatever it is you need to do to keep a log of things that you can go back to. And then when you get a brief or a project in, his process is pretty straightforward. You gather all the materials together. So you go, what's all the source materials? What's all the information? If you've done your analysis, you've got, questions, any metrics, things like that, get it all together, put it all together, review it, tag it, index it, and then leave it and, go to sleep. That's my addition, because I think, sleep for me between creative ideas is so important. And then come back the next day, go for a swim, as someone said, and just let the ideas flow. Try not to force it, because that's when you're going to struggle. is actually just kind of give yourself time in the day to either wonder or to be doing something else, and just let it come to you. So there's a lot in there about time management as well. And then obviously experiment, is something that I go on about all the time, if you've ever heard me talk before or know me. So I won't bore you with that one, but obviously just, you've got to try new things and you've got to see what works, because you'll never get it right first time. So that's kind of, something that I love to live by, and it really helps me with creative ideas, especially when I'm sat there going like, well, I don't know where to start with this. There's a great thing there about creative brainstorming techniques. I think brainstorming and creativity is a collaborative exercise and a private exercise. You'll see some people jumping on both sides, but I think you need to do it as a group, and then you need to do it yourself. So what we tend to do is prepare on our own and then get together and share. That's the kind of Media Zoo magic, because it really does. You need time, you need space, and you need a thought to just ruminate, but then you need to bring it to your colleagues to find out if it's any good, and get some constructive feedback. So both of those ways, are really, really important. But I love the idea of creative problem solving. It's such a great thing, and I steal from everywhere. I steal from different industries. I steal headlines, taglines. So almost every model I ever present is from somewhere else. I don't think we need to recreate the wheel every time. We can just bring things together, adapt them, stick them together, and try them out. So want to move on now briefly to the next set of, I guess, sort of responses that people had, which has been touched on a lot in the chat already, which is, how are we getting buy-in, from the stakeholders? How do we get users involved? How do we get people to shift their perspective on, what they think learning is and what we're expected to do as an L&D team? And a huge one in the bottom left for me there is compromising on the client's wishes. I mean, that's my life. We're an agency, so we have to manage those, between what someone wants to pay for and what we're trying to achieve. This is the crux. The hardest bit about learning design for me is, we've got our skill set, but then all of a sudden we've got to apply it and implement it into the business. And that's a really, really tricky part. So, I'd love to hear how people go around this. I think this is a perfect example of a complex problem. You've got stakeholders, SMEs, you've got your audience, you've got your team, you've got yourself, you've got your ability. How do you manage all of that? And how do you make something that works or is successful? This is something absolutely there's no correct answer for. And I think there's so much value in how different people approach it. I've got, kind of my approaches, but it's really good. I would love to hear how some of you kind of approach this. Evidence of success is absolutely one of the best ways to do it. I think it's the key way, possibly the only way. But that one is tricky and it takes time. How often do people get to brainstorm a solution versus take the client's order? That's a really, really good question. How many times do you just get someone summon to you, I need this in 2 or 3 weeks, or, and it needs to be this. I need systems training. I need sales training. I need this. It's a really, really tricky thing to do. And it's really easy for us to sit on the internet and whatever and say, yeah, what you need to do is you need to stop being an order taker and you need to change. It's really, really tough. I had a job, my last one before I joined Media Zoo actually, and I really, really struggled there was a really super busy ops team, and I just couldn't get them to listen to me. They were interested in training, sure, it was on their radar, but when I said, hey, can I get half day of your time as a subject matter expert to help me with content? Too busy. And I was failing at my, I wasn't hitting my KPIs because I wasn't getting my work done. And I was at the point where, I was chatting to my boss and I was blaming them. I was chatting to the HRD and saying, look, I can't get their time. They don't care about me. They're not interested in me. And I was sort of hoping that she'd go, I'll talk to the ops director and tell them to work with you. And, it was such a failure of taking ownership from my part, until kind of one day when I overheard them chatting about a problem with an IT system that it was easy to fix, but people, had a choice to make and they kept on doing the wrong one and it slowed them down. And I just suddenly sort of clocked and was like, well, I could just give them a nice looking PDF or something, that would help guide people with the right decision. And I stumbled on this solution, shared it with them, and they were really engaged in creation of it. And it sort of twigged something just clicked in me that I realized that if I spoke their language to them and went and asked them what we're trying to do, rather than approaching them saying, hey, I need to do this piece of training, I need your time to give me content, and really flipped it and said, how can I help you? You know, and it was around that time that I stumbled across Nick Shepperton-Jones and David James's kind of work around these kind of subjects, and it really transformed how I approach things and how I talk to stakeholders, and stopped being so self-important about my job and started trying to focus on how I can, you know, how I can talk to those people in a way that they cared about. So started to really approach the ops guys a bit differently, and it didn't particularly work, I'll be honest, but it helped, and I think that was, you know, that was huge. It always takes time, and it's tricky. So sorry, I've been mumbling on and sort of not been paying attention to all of the chat here. So evidence, to say, is brilliant. Running small experiments is so powerful. The way I would do it is when we get people who are adamant that they do not want to change or flip their view, I say, you know, it's just a bit of influencing negotiation, and say, look, I'll run it your way, no problem. But would you mind if I took some of your people and tried this? Or would you mind if I also did this at the same time? You won't notice any difference in the service or the level of what's happening, but I can also test something out and see if it's any good. And then you can almost, you know, it's a bit of an A/B test, or just doesn't even have to be an A/B test, but it gets you to try your approach slightly differently. And it can be really powerful if it works, because then you've got that evidence and you haven't had to run a special project. And on that note, actually, it sort of reminds me of a client that I've been working with for a long time. And when I first started designing content for them, it was locked, click next, e-learning, you know, you will do this, you will do that. And it was completely against everything I believed in and wanted to do. And I challenged them, as you know, as I want to, but ultimately I was told, no, this is what we're paying for, and this is what we want to do. So, you know, at first I was a bit hard done by and beaten down, but we built it and it looked nicer than maybe it could have done somewhere else. So I was kind of happy with it. But then I started to play with this idea, and we've been working with this client for a long time now, that every time they came to me, I'd try and do a small adjustment. Can we unlock the slides? Can we not force this? Can we, you know, just little tweaks piece by piece by piece. And it didn't feel like much. But then when I look back at it one day, you know, I think it was after about 3 years, we'd just done a big induction program for their stores. And we'd gone from, say, when I first worked with them for lockdown, click next e-learning, to this induction program that was activity centered. So, you know, we were almost sending people on a treasure hunt on their first day around the store to learn things and find things out, talk to their managers, talk to colleagues, watch some films about how to do things. There was till training, which was based on finding products, taking it to the till and scanning them through. Then you'd go back to, you know, some kind of technical training. And any of it was e-learning, was very, very short. Whereas previously they were giving hours and hours of e-learning in a back room and told that they were trained on how to work in the shop. But so that transformation from really traditional e-learning to open, you know, activity-based induction was massive. And so it didn't feel like we were making much progress at the time. But when you look back over 3 years, it was huge change. And that's advocate, someone's put in, love that. You know, I always love to find someone who wants to do it, especially someone with influence. But yeah, finding an advocate, someone to fight your corner, someone who understands what you're trying to do, who's seen what works, really give them a voice. You know, and a cheeky one that I do a lot is try and make it someone else's solution as well. So, you know, yes and is such a great phrase for ideation, because you can build on something and add something to it. So someone says, I'd like to do it like this. And you go, yes, and we can add that. And it almost makes it a really positive spiral. So there's some really kind of clever ways that you can facilitate meetings that I find that can really help with ideation, but also just give you that little bit more freedom to kind of do things. And, you know, if I was being really kind of naughty, which unfortunately I am for my boss's sake, sometimes if I think the risk is quite low, I'll just go and try something and do it and then deliver back. but only if I can undo it really, really easily. So if it's a cheap or quick thing to do, I'll test the water just by taking the initiative and trying things out. But it's not for the faint-hearted. I think you have to be of a risky mindset. So it suits me, but I know for some people who wouldn't want to do that because they like to have things a bit more structured. I think, again, because these type of things, there is no right answer. It works really well. So one from Hora here, that sometimes we have to accept the client's order, but it's important to prioritize what matters most. And that's a huge thing, actually, is prioritizing your projects and your scope. One of the key things that's transformed how we work at MediaZoo is that when we have a first workshop with clients, we refuse to talk content, or at least not specifically about content. The first workshop is just about outcomes and audience. So we want to know what you're trying to achieve, who these people are, what their hopes, dreams, fears, and cares are, essentially. So when we look at the outcomes, we try and build 3 or a few behavioral changes. So what people are going to do differently. I'm not interested in they'll understand or they'll know. I want to know how they'll work. How will that knowledge transfer itself into what someone's doing, which is some traditional learning design. But when we have actually those 3 outcomes on the wall, the next workshop where we build the content narrative, we start talking about the content, and actually every single topic that we're going to put in is we have that discussion. We hold it up against the outcomes and say, does this topic, this piece of content relate to, or is it relevant to any of these 3 things on this wall that you said you wanted to achieve last week when we met? And if the answer is no, you've got absolute recourse to be a bit more difficult and say, why is it going into this content? So this has the benefit of removing excess nonsense, but 2, it also gives you a bit more support in what you're actually doing and how you approach it, and hopefully get you a bit of leverage with your clients. And that's where the prioritization comes in, which is so important, is that once you've got that list of content that's relevant to the outcomes, which bits are the most important, which bits are the key parts, and then you can rebuild the structure, going with the most important at the top. So loads and loads of ways actually that you can maintain that throughout the project to kind of help gain the influence that you need to do your job well, because it is really, this is a confidence game. When those people trust you, you'll get freedom. But it's really, really hard to get trust. Talking about systems earlier, this takes time. A really important thing about systems thinking is that nothing happens overnight. Change requires multiple assets and multiple bits of movement. So, and it's really, notoriously difficult, unfortunately. It takes care, time, attention, love, and constantly evolving it. Peter Senge, yes, if you've not read The Fifth Discipline about systems, brilliant book to read. That's where the term learning organization came from, actually, as well. Fifth Discipline, yeah, so I think I got that wrong. And that book was written in 89 or 1990, a long time back, where he was looking at how attitudes shape cultures, and a much wider thing, because to not get too far into psychology and pedagogy, is that we're not computers waiting to be filled up with logical thoughts. We're living, breathing humans who are very complex, and your mindset can derail the best project. So thinking importantly about the systems and about how the way things are done at your business can absolutely transform how your content works. So what works in one business won't work for another. And that's a huge reason why we MediaZoo do bespoke content, because we can't guarantee anything's going to work. So we always want to go in and actually ask questions and start again. But you have to push and challenge and really, try really, really hard to get there. No one's going to give you that time. You have to prove it. So unfortunately, there's no shortcuts to those, but I love that. And I could talk for days about those kind of issues. Another thing that came in was, not having the software to do what you want to do. And I'm really interested about this one, because it's been a challenge my whole career. I used Articulate a lot, and I pushed it to the point of breaking, until actually it got so complicated using JavaScript and things like that, that I actually then stripped it back and started deliberately minimizing all of my content. And tools have got much better nowadays. And I think, what Evolve are doing, and Rise is great. and Elucidate as well as another, it's got some really valuable things. There seem to be more, obviously slightly differently designed from Storyline, where you had a blank page, and these are kind of plug and play type website builders, but they do feel a bit limiting. But I find that limitations boost creativity. So, almost those limits, like the time, the tech, the budget, actually create a space that force you to be more creative. But I'd have a challenge to anyone who, who's saying the software that they've got isn't powerful enough, is that, and this is a completely unfair thing to level, because I don't know how to do it, but learning to code would be a really, really powerful thing to do, I think. What you can do with HTML is just insane, and it's pretty easy to wrap it with SCORM. Maybe less easy to get it working with every LMS in the world, but more and more at MediaZoo, we're using HTML, and it's limitless. It takes a bit more time. It takes a bit of mastery, but it really unlocks those challenges and issues with software. I'm sort of a bit out of date with software. What are people using these days? Because at MediaZoo, we use a whole range of rapid tools depending on what our clients like to use. But I'm not really up on what's on coming over the hill and what kind of cool features are happening now. Because I'm a Storyline 360. Okay, that's a pretty common one. Yeah. So I was a big Articulate user over the Adobe version back in those days. I used to use Articulate when it was a plugin for PowerPoint, if anybody else was there too in those days in the early 2000s.
Matt, if I can chip in while people are watching, I'm doing a lot of work with a developer who's using Evolve. In fact, two of my subcontractors are using Evolve, and they really, really like it.
Yeah.
It puts out something, we're redeveloping some training that has been very complex originally, with lots of flash and very hard to navigate, inconsistent, user experience. And now that it's been converted into Evolve, even the content seems simpler and easier to assimilate, because it's so nicely presented, and it's very quick to build. And we are actually pushing it. I wrote a branching scenario, which caused the developer to, well, he said, my brain hurts, but I think I can make it work. So I think it can be pushed. And my sense is that people are moving more towards those kinds of tools, but it would be good to know what everybody else is thinking.
Yeah, I like Evolve. The output of what it gets versus the time it takes to create and the cost of the license, I think is a no-brainer. I think versus Rise, Evolve is a much more interesting tool, but the only thing we struggled with is the mobile responsiveness with it, trying to do it. But I think, again, we're trying to overcomplicate some of the images, but you can do a lot with the branding of it. And in fact, actually, with Rise, using backgrounds and GIFs, we've done some really cool stuff. I'm just a bit, I find the overlay of Rise, obviously, because it always looks identical, is a bit challenging. Colin said in here, H5P usage. Now, I don't even know what H5P is, so I could learn something here. If you could expand on that, Colin, that I would be very very grateful. And Peter,
can we get Colin to speak? Let me see. Oh, he's given us a link.
Yeah, get Colin to speak. I'd love to hear about this if he wants to.
Colin, I've unlocked your microphone if you're there.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Did not expect this to happen, but this is okay.
Okay.
I just put a link to H5P, which is like kind of interactive activities and questions that you get. You put that into HTML. It's used in a lot of VLEs, especially in like higher ed sector. A lot of it's basic, but you can do quite a bit with it actually. And I've saw some people make some really smart, cool things with that, and it's free as well. So it just takes a bit of kind of getting used to. But yeah, I think it's, if you want something quick and nice and interactive, then I think that works quite well.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Colin.
No worries.
I'll take a look at that today. It looks really cool. Thanks. And Camtasia, gosh, yeah. Camtasia and Captivate was always the perfect combo, I remember, for systems training. There's something from Peter up here, Peter Mitchell, about limits helping you learn. So code for Storyline, yeah. So is it with Storyline now? Can you put in more? Is it still JavaScript returns, or is there more complex things you can do with it?
Shall we let Peter talk? Peter, your microphone can be opened.
Oh yeah. Hi Peter, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Matt. Yeah, it's predominantly JavaScript. It's kind of what I'm starting to investigate on. So I'm getting to that point now where when you're using Storyline, you want it to do additional wonderful things like you see suppliers like yourself doing, and you start to get limited with where that can take you. So yeah, early days, but starting to get JavaScript under my belt.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, looking at tools maybe like H5P that Colin shared, kind of plugins for code and things like that can be so powerful to give you, I guess, a front end for the code. But once you start to understand JavaScript, you're halfway there with HTML, so you may as well just start coding, I'd say.
Yeah, so what I'm going through is essentially that I'm going through a web developer course. So I started with HTML, I'm now moving on to CSS, and then I'm into Java. So I'm kind of taking myself through stages.
Cool. And then
yeah, so a quick question from me. How does that work for maintenance? Does it mean that the client always has to come back to you, or are you working in-house and it's not relevant?
So I'm working in-house, which is kind of one of the reasons why I want to do it. Working in-house, having that additional capability in-house for some of the content that we want to do. So I'm not kind of restricted to that point at the moment, John, but we are finding that when we are going to suppliers, we're having to go back to suppliers to edit stuff like that with code. So trying to boost that capability in-house.
Okay, cheers. Right, I'll mute you again.
Thank you. Cheers. That's really, really useful. Oh, there you go. You can do so much with HTML5 and CSS. I know what CSS is. And you don't even need JavaScript. Yeah, see, what I do is we've got dev team who build all this stuff. But what I found is really cool is that when you understand how these blocks work, there's so much of it you can bootstrap, from GitHub and places like that. And where clients are okay with it, with us, we've really reduced the cost of some of our development to create really cool kind of platforms. Big focus for us is creating content that looks like the internet. So trying to kill e-learning subtly. So almost article-based content, and thinking with interactions about what adds value, rather than the old kind of like trying to hide content or checking, doing knowledge checks, because that's what learning theory tells us we should do, and actually go, what's the problem I'm trying to solve, and how can I immerse people through the scenarios more to get them really living and breathing, thinking about the topic. And that's where I think the future of HTML with that is going to be huge. If you've seen, I think McKinsey 550 do really, McKinsey do some articles called 550, which are really cool interactive learning tools basically that cover topics like machine learning, and you can do a 5-minute skim or a 50-minute deep dive, and loads of interactive kind of pieces. And the Slack demo site is a really good example of something like that too, where we like to play with content like that. So it's you're building these kind of scenarios and playing with them and really getting people to practice the skills that we're trying to do, which I think leads me on to the next slide quite nicely, oddly, actually, which never happens for me. Segue. No, so this is a great question. Making it accessible for people with impairments and disabilities. Now, I genuinely don't have an answer for this, because we've got the kind of compatibility guidelines, but they are just guidelines. The only way that I've ever really approached it, and it's been a while since I've been internal, but is actually doing the investigation to find out how many people you've got with disabilities, and are they willing to talk to you about it, and how can you help them resolve the issues. What we tend to do is ask loads of clients, or all of our clients, what their guidelines are and what they're wanting to do. And I've got a little brief story about a really cool accessibility project I did actually with one of our clients. So while I'm saying that, if anybody's got any really cool ways to help with accessibility, please do add it in the box, because I think this can be really valuable, because it's always a tricky issue. I think there's nothing sadder than creating something awesome that some people can't access. So I think it is really important. An amazing story actually was the Olympics 2012 in London, where I was lucky enough to work for them for LOCOG, But before then, the underground didn't really have lifts or accessible access for people with wheelchairs. And I think it's such a huge thing, and it was an event like the Olympics that forced the TFL to actually change that. So that was really cool. But one piece of training that I did with one of our clients was about cash machines. So it was a banking client, and they were introducing touchscreen banking. So it could actually help with people with visual impairments, and actually loads of kind of features. But one thing we were trying to do was, how can we help people understand what it's like to use a cash machine, you know, when you can't see everything as clearly. And so actually what we ended up doing was just using Google Cardboard, not Google Glass, Google Cardboard, downloading an app that's free, and trying to get people to use the existing cash machines with this app that actually simulated the different impairments of visibility. And so we could actually show people what it felt like to try and use the existing cash machines with so I was just reading the text while I was there, but yeah, using cash machines so they can actually understand the problems. So then when we were showing them solutions with the new cash machine and what it could do, they actually really got a feel for it. So that kind of stuff is really powerful, is understanding your audience and your the people who are using things. So really try and talk to your audience there is one that I would recommend. And then the final point that we picked up on, which is a bit of a sticky one, and I love it, again, is people not putting pedagogy before technology. It'd be interesting to see if there is a dividing line there. Are people on one side of the fence or the other? Do people have a love for one or the other? Are you a pedagogy person or a technology person? My opinion, for what it's worth, is that the right technology for the right solution at the right time. So this is all about using pedagogy with technology to augment it. So understanding how we learn is absolutely key to our way of work. And you know, underneath what we do at MediaZoo, there's lots of you know, cool, high quality content, for if I can big myself up. But it's all driven by an understanding that, you know, that people need different elements to kind of learn, and you know, that's that kind of thinking. So you kind of get some knowledge, we're trying things out, it's like practicing, and then these critical skills, which is reflecting, and also challenging. So there's a kind of a triangle of skills that you need: knowing, thinking, doing. And that comes into kind of constructivist approach to learning, which I'm a big fan of, which is that you know, I really think learning is all about having a big skill, breaking it down into smaller skills and practicing them, and then joining them together. And I'm oversimplifying it, but I love to oversimplify that, because one of the stickiest I think arguments we have in L&D is you know, what's right, what's not, when it comes to people, how people learn. But I wonder how people measure putting pedagogy before technology, and how they do it. And if you've got any ideas, please share them, because ultimately what I do is we hide the pedagogy, and I don't know if that's the right way to do it. But when I show someone, you know, the idea, a sketch for a program or some content or how we're going to do it, I don't include anything to do with how people will learn or what the approach is. I baked it into the way I want to do it and think about it. When I present it back, I'm presenting the structure, just to show people how they'll go through it. I don't know if that's the right answer, but it's the way I've managed to sneak in some quite technical, geeky L&D things without boring people or without people challenging it. Joan's been told frequently been told not to use jargon. For me, I think that's one of my favorite things, is that I try to not use complex technical terms. I probably don't. You can probably listen back to this, and I've probably thrown buzzwords everywhere. But you know, when you know, I mentioned it earlier, is talking to ops teams. You need to talk like ops teams. They're not going to engage with you if you talk about training. And I think that's quite important, isn't it? That none of this is new. I'm sure you've heard all of these things 1,000 times before. And when I do presentations, they tend to be very simple and focused on a few messages. And the reason is, and it's a lot of people are kind of, so what? But the reason is that I think we're not really doing them. We can sit and stand and say, oh yeah, we simplify. Yeah, we put our audience at the center. But how many people are really actually doing it? How many people are really measuring their work? And, we all talk about measurement and we all win awards for measurement. But I can promise you that it's, less than 50% of our projects have metrics and measurements put in place that are benchmarked and tested by the time we kick them off. And that's a reality. And it's up to us to change that. We can sit and say that we can't, we can't this, we can't that. And I say, oh, it's the client's fault. So it's a really interesting challenge, but we're the ones who have to drive it and take accountability and ownership of it. Learning outcomes, Joan. We have learning outcomes, and I think, but it's all about behavioural for me. As I say, it's all about what people are doing differently and how are we focusing on that. But those outcomes, we want to tie them to the issue that we have. So a good friend of mine, Peter Manish Riva, said something amazing once to me, and he said, when someone can't measure something, you ask them, how do they know they've got a problem if they've not measured it? And I think that's such a fascinating insight into that, is that someone has to know there's a problem. They have to have identified something. So that then becomes a measure that you can resolve. So quite fascinating. I love it. So yeah, that's how kind of learning outcomes can work. And then, so just reading Colin here, do they want to hear jargon that they understand? I know that learning design principles and pedagogies go over clients' heads, and sometimes, so I need to adapt to the organization of language. Might not be the correct terms, but it moves the conversation forwards. I'm absolutely on that side, Colin, is that if I know that I'm confident that I'm putting in the rigor that it's needed to give it the best chance of success, then I'm comfortable that I can call it anything. A label essentially is, God, I was about to quote Shakespeare, but I won't. I think that within context, unless you're misleading people, I think it's okay to transform what you're saying and simplify it and use metaphors and analogies. To get people to understand is the most important part of communication. It's completely pointless if someone hasn't understood what you said. So I think how to transform that is really important. Joan, I think learning outcomes, you just mentioned their business or performance outcomes. I think, again, just on that point above, I don't think it matters what we call them. Focusing on those kind of things it should be about what are you trying to get people to do, and how do the metrics that you have available to you help you measure that and identify it. There is never a metric that shows success of a project. We tend to build a little, one-pager PDF with 7 or 8 different things that we think potentially could be used to show value and change over time to show the success of a project or failure. And that's the big issue with measurement, isn't it? Is that when we track it, we might find that it didn't do anything or it made it worse. You've got to face up to that. And someone said earlier about, being prepared to try new things and fail is really important. It's a huge part of it. That's the only way to get better. So that's, a huge topic, I think, that we could always explore. And maybe Joan, it's one for the future is looking at some of these responses in more detail. And just reading some of these updates, sorry. I think what Hora is saying, Joan, actually maps into your question quite a lot, is that, you can have success criteria, and also align to people's personal development goals. So it doesn't always have to be business success. If the job roles are aligned to the business outcomes, then as long as you're helping people do their jobs better, you're helping the business perform and achieve its goals. So I think that's, there's lots of ways you can kind of approach that outcome metrics based kind of thing, because a metric can be a manager saying, yes, they've improved, as long as you benchmark it and use the same kind of structure and approach of how you do it, and keep it consistent. So before and after is the key to metrics, rather than what metrics they are. It's when you measure them.
Good point. We've got about 5 minutes left. Matt, how are you doing? That's
me. All that's left is a slide to show off about awards, but I won't dwell on that.
I'd like a minute at the end just to alert people to what else is coming up. But shall we ask people anybody got a question they would like to put to Matt? Because what we can do with Colin and Peter is to open up your microphone. So there's a little hands up icon. you should be able to see. If anybody has a question, or just put one into the chat. But you're right, I think the whole thing about learning business objectives and all those things, that's a whole topic in itself.
Mm. It's a deep one, and you know, like, I think like all of this is, we could all sit down together as learning people and come up with a great solution, and then as soon as you go back to your business, they're like, no, that won't work. Which kind of ties it into this topic, I think, amazingly, those kind of complex niggling issues that are really difficult to resolve.
So what's your biggest challenge so far, would you say? Is it dealing with coronavirus lockdown and getting everybody working remotely and still maintaining those relationships with your client, or is it more?
I think the biggest challenge right now, is so for us has been taking our face-to-face approach with clients remotely. That's been tricky. So we always do workshops in person to try and have conversations rather than do box ticking kind of exercises. And obviously that's all been done via Zoom calls like this. So we've been practicing with breakout rooms and things. And the other one is it's a bit more subtle, is the kind of the team's mindset, motivation and energy. Complex problems become more complex when we can't communicate as well. So that is really tough.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the same as it always has been for my kind of current role, which is about selling innovation and making, and supporting a high performing team. Those three bits are extra challenging right now, because selling to clients is tough, because quite rightly, everyone's focused on slightly different things. And the innovation piece is so hard to get people to push to new things when they're struggling to manage what's in front of them. So those are my kind of really tricky things right now.
Interesting. I think we've always said change is hard to manage and achieve. And in fact, I suppose what's happened recently is that there's been no option but to make it happen. So I think the backlash to that is that people are exhausted and struggling with some of these new ways of working.
Yeah. There's a question from Colin just come in. What collaboration tools do we use? So we use Trello for project boards, which is really, really handy. Great collaborative tool. We use Slack for project kind of chatter. So we have channels set up for each project. We've started using Workplace, which is another platform, but it's actually really cool for just staying in touch easily in a natural format, because Slack was a bit clunky and some parts of our business weren't into it. So Workplace has been really good. Miro is something that we've been using for our webinars, which is a kind of collaborative post-it note type tool where you can create process flows and put questions and answers. So that's something that's really, really awesome tool that I was actually going to use today, but I couldn't work the tech at the same time as talking to you because there'd be lots of silence, but that's a great one to look at. And then we use a lot of whatever our clients use as well. So we're quite adaptable. But for the other thing for me that I love talking about is putting deliberate reflection points in our process so that people get together and talk and challenge each other and share ideas. So, no matter what collaboration tools we've got, a conversation is really powerful as well.
What just flashed past the camera, Mark?
Oh, so that's a cat. We've got a house full of pets and they're all noisy and attention seeking.
So we've had some good feedback. I wonder if you could just hand back control to me and I'll share. Oh,
sorry, yeah.
Oh, that's been brilliant. I just want to show people the ELN website. Can you see that okay? So yes. That's today's. We've got more webinars scheduled. We've got a really interesting one on the 26th with some of the people from O2 who are going to be talking about, I think they had to convert a week-long face-to-face course to, to virtual. So Andy Moorman, one of our directors, is going to lead that one. I'm actually doing one myself with Leslie Crane at the beginning of July. And we've got another one from LAS on 24th of July. And we are running these coffee mornings. We had one yesterday. So again, all part of the extra service during lockdown, which will probably extend. But you can drop in any time between 9 and 1 just for a chat. And people are finding it quite therapeutic, I think, to be able to just chat to other people, not feel like they're alone, share problems or whatever. If anybody's not a full member, you won't be able to access things like the coffee morning or the Slack channel, but the membership fee is just £29, and that's for the whole year. And it does include access to 5 hours of mentoring. So I think that's per membership year as well. So yeah. So I think I don't have any more to add, just to say thank you so much, Matt. It's been a fascinating session. And oh, I can come back on there. Yeah. Oh, I can't hear you anymore. Have you muted yourself?
I did.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I said I love what the eLearn do, and I think it's a great collection of people. So really chuffed to be able to have a chat with you.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for joining. And the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, which I put the link to. So I'll stop recording now, but we'll be able to see some more of the comments coming in.